The Pacific in 1942 was a graveyard for slow aircraft. The consolidated PBY Catalina was never meant to be a killer. It was a flying boat, large, lumbering, and nicknamed the Blue Goose. It was built for long-range scouting and pulling wet, shivering pilots from the sea. But during the day, it was a sitting duck for Japanese Zeros. It was a relic that the Navy High Command was starting to doubt. While the Spitfires and Hellcats chased glory, the Catalina crews were tired of being targets. Deep in the Solomon Islands, a rogue transformation began. Under the cover of palm fronds, crews traded their blue paint for matte black soot and oil. They weren't just changing the color, they were changing the soul of the aircraft. They stripped out the heavy rescue gear and the bunks. In their place, they crammed in extra fuel tanks and enough bombs to sink a cruiser. This was the birth of the Black Cats. Technically, these modifications were unauthorized, experimental, dangerous, and borderline illegal. The airframes were overloaded, groaning under weight they were never designed to lift. But the mission had changed. The Japanese Tokyo Express moved at night, slipping through the darkness to reinforce their strongholds. The Navy needed a ghost that could see in the dark. The Black Cats would fly out into the pitch-black Pacific, 10 feet above the waves. They turned off their lights and throttled back their engines until they were a whisper. They used early temperamental radar to hunt for the silhouettes of enemy destroyers. A Catalina doesn't dive, it glides like a shadow. Imagine the Japanese deck crews staring into a black void, hearing nothing but the wind. Suddenly, a 5-ton ghost emerges from the darkness at mast height. It doesn't use a bomb sight. The pilot aims by looking out the side window at the enemy funnels. The bombs release, skipping across the water like stones before slamming into the hull. The Blue Goose was gone. In its place was a midnight predator that the Japanese sailors came to fear more than anything in the sky. They called them the Phantoms of the Solomons. The rescue boat had become the executioner. This was the illegal war of the Black Cats, where the slow survived by becoming invisible.
The night was the only armor the Black Cats had. To survive, the crews pushed the PBY beyond every engineering limit written in the manual. They flew missions that lasted 14 hours, staring into a black abyss until their eyes bled. The interior of a Black Cat was a den of grease, smoke, and the constant hum of high voltage. They installed primitive air-to-surface radar, the secret weapon that let them see what the enemy could not. It was a bulky, temperamental box that hummed with a ghostly green glow in the cockpit. While the Japanese relied on their eyes, the Black Cats relied on pulses of electricity. But the radar only got them to the target. The kill was still a matter of raw nerves. They developed a tactic that the Navy brass considered suicidal, the skip bombing run. A Catalina is too slow to dive bomb and too big to be precise from high altitude. So they went low, so low that the salt spray from the Pacific coated the windshields. They would throttle back the engines to a low drone, blending into the sound of the ocean. The pilot would fly at 50 feet, judging the height by the reflection of the moon on the water. When the radar bloomed with a massive return, they knew they had found a destroyer. The Japanese crews wouldn't see them until they were less than a mile away. Suddenly, the black sky would shatter into a million pieces of colored light. Tracer fire from 25mm anti-aircraft guns would weave a web of death around the slow-moving plane. The Catalina would shudder as the massive hull caught the slipstream of the exploding shells. The pilot didn't flinch. He held the course until the enemy ship filled the entire windscreen. Click.
The heavy bombs dropped away, skipping across the surface of the sea like flat stones. They didn't hit the deck, they hit the waterline, the soft underbelly of the ship. The resulting explosion would lift the stern of a destroyer clean out of the water. The Black Cat wouldn't climb away, it would bank hard and vanish back into the shadows. By the time the Japanese searchlights hit the spot, the ghost was already gone. These weren't just attacks, they were psychological warfare. The Japanese sailors began to whisper about the gecko, the moonlit ghosts that struck without warning. Back at base, the crews would count the bullet holes in the fabric-covered wings. Sometimes there were hundreds. Sometimes the planes returned with pieces of the enemy's radio antenna snagged on their floats. They were operating outside the lines of conventional naval warfare. They were the night marauders, rewriting the rules of the Pacific, one sinking ship at a time.
By 1944, the rogue experiment had become an essential weapon of the Pacific theater. The Black Cats were no longer just a few desperate crews. They were a coordinated nightmare. They moved with the front lines, setting up secret bases in forgotten lagoons and muddy inlets. The illegal Catalina had fundamentally changed the math of the ocean. The Japanese military could no longer move men or fuel under the safety of the stars. Entire island garrisons were left to starve because the Black Shadows owned the night. But the war was taking a brutal toll on the men and the machines. The PBY was never built for the constant stress of low-level combat maneuvers. Metal fatigue turned the airframes into rattling cages of aluminum. The crews lived on coffee, benzodrine, and pure adrenaline, flying until they forgot what daylight looked like. Every mission was a gamble against the horizon. If they didn't finish the hunt before dawn, they were dead. A Black Cat caught in the morning sun was a slow, defenseless target for any passing Zero. Many crews vanished without a trace, swallowed by the vast, dark water they tried to master. As the Allies pushed toward the Japanese mainland, the Black Cats took on a new, darker role. They became the bloodhounds for the massive carrier strikes that would follow at dawn. They would orbit the enemy fleets in total darkness, whispering coordinates back to the fleet. They were the eyes of the hammer, guiding the destruction while remaining unseen. When the war finally ended, the legend of the Black Cats was quickly buried in official reports. The Navy moved on to sleek jets and carrier-borne bombers. The matte black paint was stripped away, and the surviving PBYs were sold for scrap or sent to the boneyard. The illegal modifications and the mast height suicide runs became stories told only in veterans' halls. But the history of naval warfare had been permanently altered. The Black Cats had proven that a slow, outdated plane could defeat a modern fleet through stealth and daring. They were the pioneers of electronic night warfare and the ancestors of the modern stealth bomber. They proved that in the chaos of war, the most effective weapon isn't always the newest. Sometimes it's a rescue boat painted with soot, piloted by men who refused to be victims. The Blue Goose died in the Solomons so the Black Cat could live in history. The ghosts of the Pacific had finished their watch.